So thanks everybody for coming. This is our fifth and final part of our flow monitoring webinar series. So thanks for joining. If you haven't seen the other ones, I'll talk a little bit about them today, and we do have some media available for you if you do want to check those out. But yeah, thanks for joining. It's been a fun series so far, and yeah, we started end of last year, so it's kind of nice to come to a wrap on this one, and we're brainstorming ideas for our next series. So yeah, this one's mostly focused on modeling and how we sort of utilize that flow and rainfall data to do that modeling, mostly collection systems, a little bit of focus probably today mostly on the wastewater side, but there's certainly more we can talk about. We have 45-ish, 50 minutes of slides and stuff to go through. So it's certainly a bigger topic than just that. But yeah, feel free to reach out as always. If you do want to chat outside of these meetings, we're always happy to, or outside of these webinars, we're always open to meeting and chatting further with everybody. So sort of typical housekeeping that we go through. So we typically, these webinars have sort of three parts: the presentation. Usually we do polls, and today we have a slight variation on that. So we'll have some trivia and then a Q&A at the end. But there is a Q&A box. Everybody should see a little Q&A box at the bottom, or a chat function, so you can type in questions into either of those areas. Both during and after the presentation, and we'll get to them in that Q&A session. There is I think 2 polls in this one, so we do have a couple polls, so keep an eye out for that. You'll see a pop-up box for the polls and the trivia. If you are looking to claim PEO P credits, feel free to reach out to us after the webinar at info@civi.ca, and we'll send you a certificate of attendance. So this is a new thing we're doing this time. We felt like with the last webinar of the series, we should give away some prizes and kind of thank people for coming out. So keep an eye out. As I mentioned before, there will be pop-ups throughout. You'll see a slide with a question, and then there'll be a pop-up and you can answer it. So there's 7 questions, and you'll have 20 seconds to try to make it reasonable to be able to answer the question, but not too long so you can Google all the answers. So hopefully that gets us good results, and the winners will get a $50 gift card. So we'll tabulate it at the end, and we'll reach out to those who win. So yeah, keep an eye out, and you should be able to see these pop up as we go through the webinar. So a little bit about us, a little bit about Civica, just so that those who maybe aren't aware of us, we have pretty senior staff, a group of engineers, technicians, project managers. So we have a group of quite a few people, some senior people with 25 plus years experience. We kind of deem ourselves as inflow and infiltration specialists. So we have a lot of work across mostly Southern Ontario, focused on I&I. We do a lot of flow monitoring and analysis of that data. And as you saw probably with previous webinars, we got into a lot of that sort of quality control and analysis of data. We also do sewer asset services. So I have a few pictures of our CCTV camera, our flushing truck, and some of our staff doing remediation within a maintenance hole. We have a whole modeling group, including Alan, who's here today, runs our modeling group. Master planning, water, wastewater, stormwater. We've worked on a few different basement and surface flood studies, and I think Alan has a few examples of that today. And then sort of your typical water resources engineering. We work on those projects as well. A little bit about myself. So I'm Matt Malone. I'm a project manager and VP of Business Development at Civica. I have 8+ years of experience, both on the consulting and municipal side, mostly dealing in collection systems, planning, I&I studies, flow monitoring, remediation. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far, and looking forward to continuing that with a lot of the relationships that we have with people here today. Alan, I'll pass it over to you. Maybe you can do a quick introduction to yourself.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, my name is Alan Villalobos. I've been in Civica now for close to 10 years, 9 years. I run the modeling group in Civica, so I do a lot of modeling for sanitary, combined, storm sewers. But I will say my specialty is collection systems, so wastewater system, like sanitary and combined modeling. So a lot of projects for municipalities, master planning, capacity analysis, and also helping to provide some solutions for developers when they need to submit the site plan applications. So I try to help them as well and provide some solutions if there's no capacity for their system, for their site.
So our first poll, this is a poll, not a question. I guess we could count it as a trivia one, but it's a pretty easy one if we did it that way. So the first question, you know, we like to tell everybody about ourselves. So just love to get feedback on what type of organization you work for, so we get a good sense of the audience here today. So we'll give this one, I can give this one more than 20 seconds. A couple more seconds. So we got a good, a bigger mix today. Typically, we're heavily municipal folks, but we're almost kind of a 50-40 split, municipalities and engineering, consulting, and contracting, and then a few that have others. So yeah, good mix today. Glad to see it. Not that we don't like the municipal folk. It's great to have a good mix, though. It's nice to see. Okay, so I believe we have our first trivia question. Okay, so as I said, this is a little different in terms of what we normally do, and I should probably figure out how to do this first. Oh, here we go. So the first trivia question that we have, so you probably have a little more than 20 seconds. So Ontario is home to the largest freshwater island in the world. Name that island. So I'll give, I do need to be quick on the thing here, so don't give people too much time to Google it. Okay, so we're coming up to 20 seconds now. All right, so hopefully that worked out well. It looks like we got quite a few people that were able to answer. So if I cut you off before you're able to answer, sorry about that, but we'll have to keep moving on. So yeah, as I mentioned, this is the 5th part in our flow monitoring series. So we're at the stage where we're talking sort of all the way down towards the end of, okay, now we're doing flow monitoring in a collection system. What do we do with this data? Last webinar was more focused on its sort of role in I&I studies. And today we're going to, again, focus more on modeling and you know, specific focus on collection system modeling and wastewater system modeling. A quick recap of the previous 4 webinars. So part 1, we did basically an introduction to flow and rainfall monitoring, sort of the 5 W's and 1 H. And you know, the most important thing that I sort of took out of that, or we kind of took away from that, is the why we do it. So we want to understand how the natural environment is impacting us. We want to measure rainfall. We want to understand how storms are changing over time. And then subsequent to that, we want to assess the built systems, the infrastructure, and how they perform when we do get things like rainfall events. You know, are our collection systems operating as we sort of expected them to, based on the design that went into those various features? And then, you know, future looking, how do we make these existing systems better? How do we optimize them? How do we accommodate future growth and adapt to changes in climate? So this is sort of a high level first webinar we did on sort of the why we do it and sort of high-level introduction to the concept. Part two, we had two expert presentations. So we had Scott Brown from Hoskin come in talking about rainfall monitoring, the equipment available and how to sort of operate and maintain that equipment. And then we had Dave Walker from Detectronic. He was talking mostly about flow monitoring and again, the equipment and some of the considerations that need to be taken to use that equipment, operate, maintain it, and get the results from that equipment. Part three, we talked about data quality. So how do we get good data quality out of these, out of this equipment that we put in the field? We spend quite a bit of money and time and effort in doing these activities. So how do we, at the end of the day, get the best data out of our flow and rainfall monitoring programs? So we talked some of the field activities, the things that we do on site, add a rain gauge, add a flow meter to make sure that it's producing the best quality data, and then also sort of remote activities or things that we do in office, alarming, scoring, giving QA/QC scores, scatter graphs, all of the types of data quality measures that we put in place to get that good quality data at the end of the day. And then last webinar, we talked about flow and rainfall monitoring and its sort of role in I&I studies. So we talked about what is I&I, what is inflow and infiltration. We talked about the various analyses that you would typically see, both from a rainfall side and a flow analysis. And then at the end of the day, what do we do with that information? So we talked about the actions that you would then implement if you had an inflow issue or an infiltration issue or some combination of the two. So that was again, very brief recap of the four that we did previously. And if you do want to check those out, then feel free again to follow up with us, check out our website, everything's on there. So we do have our second trivia question. So you should see a pop-up at this point. So do you know approximately how many lakes there are in Ontario? This one might be a little trickier than the previous one. And we'll give about 20 seconds for this one. All right, and time is up. Okay, so let's jump into the sort of meat and potatoes of today, which we're talking about the modeling side and using flow and rainfall data. But just to give a little bit of background and some context, in Ontario, and I realize some people that are joining are from Ontario or outside of Ontario, but within the context of Ontario, and I'm sure other places are experiencing this as well, is we have quite a bit of growth that's expected. So the latest figures I saw were around 5 to 6 million people growth by 2043. Right now, I think the immigration level is around 500,000 people per year. So we're a lot of people coming in, and with that growth, there's a lot more sort of pressure and planning around intensifying. So building up in the existing systems that we have. So you can see on the figure on the right just shows kind of where the expected growth is coming, or where it will be sort of focused around. So you can see GTA West and around Ottawa. This is from the province. And then on the left-hand side, we can see how the growth plans and what's being adopted by some of the councils around the GTA in terms of intensification. So this is a percentage of new homes that will be single detached. Now it seems to be a bit of a gap between what essentially the market wants and what the growth plans and the councils are adopting. That's probably a different subject for a different day. But the fact of it is that a lot of the intensification or a lot of the growth that's going to happen is going to be in areas where we have potential, existing issues with capacity and older infrastructure. So we need to accommodate both a growing population and an intensification on our current systems. Another sort of, caveat or thing to think about that we have to accommodate with our collection systems is the potential for larger storms. So this is figures from Environment Canada, where by the late century, what you would consider a 50-year return period storm may become a 20-year storm or a 10-year storm. So these large, high-intensity storms happening more frequently. Same with the volume of rainfall. So there's an expected increase in the volume of rainfall with an increase in temperature and the clouds being able to hold more moisture. It stands to reason that as we do increase temperatures with predicted changes in climate, that we'll see larger and more intense rainfall events. So these are sort of some of the pressures that our systems will experience now and into the future. So why do we do this? Why do we model? Why do we assess capacity? So one of the things is, you may have capacity and not know it. So with a lot of the sort of innovation and technology for things like water use, low flow toilets, high efficiency water use fixtures, things like that, there have been improvements in terms of how much water we use on a sort of per capita basis. I know in some areas there are reductions actually in populations. There's a neighborhood near me that has a lot of large older homes that used to have families in them, 3, 4, 5 people per home, and now they're down to one or two. So there's changes in sort of population dynamics and how many people are living in a certain area. So these things may have actually relieve some capacity in these systems. Specifically, this would be for like a wastewater system. And there may be less wet weather flow than expected that is impacting these systems. Again, more specifically on the wastewater side. That's typically not the case. What I would say is what we find in more often than not is that there's actually capacity issues, and there may be more wet weather flow or rainwater getting into things like our wastewater systems. So when we run into these capacity issues, what we would see is, maybe an ideal situation, we have some sewage and some small amount of I&I or infiltration allowance. And this would be sort of our ideal situation, but in actuality, we see a lot of locations where the amount of flow going through during storm events is much higher than what we had designed for and what we would expect. This may not necessarily be an issue. So if this pipe isn't full, it may not be causing direct impacts, but sometimes it does. So in certain situations when we have large storms, we might get the pipes to fill up. Our wastewater pipes may fill up with rainwater, and then it'll back up and go into basements. And that's one of the issues that we find when we do have capacity constraints and we do see a lot of rainwater, for example, getting into wastewater systems. So we could have things like increased combined sewer overflows or sanitary sewer overflows, non-compliance with ministry procedures, downstream flood risks, as I already mentioned. And this leads to things like delayed development approvals, high cost to build bigger pumping station, treatment facility, storage, all of those things. And those things typically take a long time when you think about building a new treatment facility or pumping station. So these are the things that we're trying to identify and utilizing models to understand these phenomena, these implications to these systems. So there's a number of different ways you can assess capacity. There's the increase in the level of complexity as we move from a more static or sort of spreadsheet analysis down to a calibrated dynamic model. It does increase in complexity and therefore cost, but it does also increase in the level of accuracy and sort of the defensibility of that model and trying to reflect as much as possible what's happening in the real world in a particular collection system. I mean, the famous phrase is all models are wrong, but at the end of the day, this is as close as we can get to a sort of real world understanding of what's happening in these systems. So we have another trivia question. So what is the average water consumption of Canadians every day per person? So give a few seconds for people to answer that one. And time is up. Right. And with that, I'll pass it over to Alan, who's going to talk more about modeling.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so now let's talk about modeling and why do we model and what do we need to model a system. So basically, we develop these models to identify any capacity constraints that the system may have, or we want to assess the capacity of a pumping station, or we want to know if a treatment plant has capacity, or a CSO, a combined sewer overflow, is active during certain events. So maybe the municipality has some issues with their system, or they know a problematic area where, I don't know, basement flooding occurs every year during a storm event, and we need to know the reason why. So we develop the models, and we try to identify the causes of the issues, or we need to identify if a pumping station is overwhelmed, and that type of scenarios, right? And then once we identify the issues, we typically need to provide a solution. And then we address or evaluate the solutions. The solution could be upsize a sewer. We can divert a flow to another pipe that has capacity. We can provide storage. We can retrofit a pumping station. Different type of solution depending on the problem. So that's why we create these hydraulic models. We also create the hydraulic models because maybe we need to service the future population. We need to create the scenarios for the future growth of a municipality, and we need to know if there's capacity to service the future growth. So those are the scenarios where we develop the models. And now, once we have a model developed, once we have the sewer network and the subcatchments and the population assigned to the models, there are two things that we can use for the models. One is to use theoretical flows. So every municipality should have design flows. But also we can use historical flow data, which is the subject of the presentation today. So if we use flow data, then the model can be calibrated. And the model can be calibrated to dry weather flow when there's no precipitation, or we can be calibrated to wet weather flow when we use also the rain data to estimate or predict the flow during a certain rain event. Now, a calibrated model that will help the engineers or the operators of the system to understand the behavior of the system. Like, why do we have these issues? Why the water is entering the sanitary system? Why do we need to upsize a sewer? So that is very important for the model to have a calibration. Now, the other thing is, okay, we can calibrate the model, but what data we want to use? So we need to have also a reliable data and usually a long-term data series to calibrate the model. We can have flow data for a month, which is okay, it's good. We can have one rain event to calibrate the model, but we typically need more than that. We typically need, I will say, anywhere from 3 to 6 rain events, different intensities, different volumes, and reliable data, like I said. So we're just gonna go quickly through what we need in terms of flow data and why do we need this flow data to calibrate the model. Okay, so now the client decided to go and use flow data because they have it. So what do we need to develop the model? One, we need population, because the population or the flow data will be assigned to the population so we can estimate the per capita flow rates. we also need flow data and rainfall data, because we are going to calibrate the model for both dry weather and wet weather flow. Now, the population, like I said, we need it for estimate the per capita flow rate. Typically, the per capita flow rate, it ranges anywhere between 100 to 450 liters per capita per day. If you are outside of that range, it might be that your population is underestimated or overestimated, or it could also be maybe the flow data has some issues. So you need to investigate that. With flow data, we can also establish the groundwater infiltration, or GWI that we called. Depending on the methodology that you want to use for estimation of the GWI, the easiest way to do it is just assume 85% of minimum flow, which happens during the night. So when there's no people using the toilets, people are not taking showers. So there's the minimum flow, and 85% of that will be your base flow. That can be also used for. Now, once we have the dry weather flow data, we need to analyze the data, and we're looking for the following items. Data consistency. So data consistency means that we need to see nice profiles, dry weather flow patterns. They has to be steady. Doesn't have to be a big jumps between months or days. It has to be very consistent. Sometimes you will see the water going up or going down depending on the season, because the groundwater can go high, can go low. So that is okay, but you will also see the dry weather flow patterns very consistent. So that's one key aspect of the data. Also, mass continuity. So let's say you have one sewer shed where you have 2 flow meters in the same conveyance path, or the same conveyance flow path. So the downstream flow meter should have more volume than the upstream flow meter. There might be some instances where the downstream flow meter has lower peak flow than the upstream, and that is okay. Could be because it's maybe upstream or between the 2 flow meters, you have a storage unit that is attenuating the flows. So peak flow, it is okay to have less peak flow than the upstream, but not the volume. The volume has to be more. So you're looking into that as well. Dry weather flows, like I say, depending on the season, dry weather flow, base flow might be higher or lower, depending on the groundwater infiltration. Weekdays and weekends diurnal patterns. So if you want to calibrate the model, you most likely want to separate the dry weather flow patterns between weekdays and weekends, because the peak flow that happens during the week is different than during the weekend. So you want to make that distinction when you calibrate the model. And like I say, the per capita flow rate, that's just a quick way to know if the population is underestimated or overestimated, or if there are some issues with the flow data. Okay. Yeah, like I said, the range typically between 100 to 450 liters per capita per day. Okay. This is only for dry weather flow. That means you take your flow data, you only analyze the database without any rain events.
Okay, so we have another poll. Oh, here we go. What is the longest river system in Canada? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay, sorry, back to you, Alan.
Thank you. Yeah, so here I just want to show you some examples of the flow monitoring data and the consistency and the flow patterns, right? So we have two data sets, different areas, but we see that the flow data, which is at the bottom of the charts in blue, has what we call the typical dry weather flow patterns. So the boxes in gray, you see there's like gray areas. So those gray areas are the weekends, Saturday and Sunday, and then you have 5 days where it's the background is white, and then again 2 blocks of background gray days, which are the weekends. So if you see the difference between the weekends and the weekdays, the weekdays, a typical dry weather flow pattern for the weekdays, you have 2 spikes. So one peak very early in the morning, around 7 and 8 a.m., which is when people are starting to waking up, going to taking some showers because they need to go to work or school. And then you see a valley and then a peak again in the afternoon when these people are coming back from school or work. So that's the typical weekday profile. And then you have the typical weekend profile, the Saturday and Sunday, where you usually only have one peak, which is late in the morning between, I don't know, anywhere between 9 and maybe 11 a.m. or 12 a.m. Because like I say, it's a weekend, people tend to sleep in and wake up later in the mornings. That I will show you some examples of what I mean by that. So again, on the top of the chart, we have the weekday profile. So we have two peaks. The first peak happens before working hours. So we have the peak here. It's happening between 6 and 8 a.m. So I think it's at 7 a.m. And then you have the second peak in the afternoon at anywhere between 6 and 8 p.m. So let's say 7 p.m. And then you have the chart at the bottom. We have the weekend profile where the peak happens around 10 a.m. and there's no second peak. Okay, so 2 different charts for 2 different weekdays. And another example, the same. So this is a different area, different flow meter, but it is the same. So we have during the weekday, we have the two peaks in the morning and the afternoon. And then for the weekend profile, we have one peak in late in the morning. Okay, so anywhere you go, I would say in Southern Ontario or probably in Canada, you might see these 2 profiles, right? So that's what you want to see in a residential area. If you don't see that, then you need to explore more about what line use is in the sewer shed. And trying to understand, maybe there is I don't know, an industrial area that is producing flows constantly during the day, and that might change the profile. Okay, so now that we have now that we did the analysis for the dry weather flow data, we can start calibrating the model using that data. You obviously want to calibrate the dry weather flow without any precipitation. So you have to select a period of time where there's no precipitation at all, or a very minimum, like less than 5 millimeters, less than 2 millimeters of rain, to run your model and see the results for the calibration. So here there's an example where we use flow data. The generation rate for this particular station was 150 liters per capita per day. We run it and we see the results for the dry weather flow calibration, which are very good. There's a difference of 5% in volume and a difference of minus 3% in peak flow for the dry weather flow calibration.
Okay, so we have number 5, trivia question number 5. So which of the Great Lakes does not share a border with Canada? Okay. more seconds. And done. Okay, back to you now.
Thank you. Now let's talk about the wet weather flow analysis. What do we need to calibrate a model for wet weather flow? So again, we download the data set, or the data set is provided to you from a consultant or a municipality. You need to perform the review before you do the modeling. Again, data consistency. We're trying to find time series that are consistent. There's no spikes. There are no gaps. There's no discrepancy between the flows. Mass continuity. Again, if you have a flow meter that is downstream of another flow meter, the volume has to be higher than the upstream flow meter. No gaps during storm events. This is very important. If you have a storm event and you have a gap in the flow data, especially if it happens during the peak rain event, I will not use that event for calibration because you don't know what the peak flow is. So don't use a flow event if you have a gap in the flow. If you have a gap in the recession, it might be okay, but not during the peak event. Reasonable time to peak for I&I response. So I will show some examples where you may have a storm event that happens, I don't know, at 12 p.m. and then you have the I&I that happens at 2 in the morning, the spike 2 in the morning. So again, you need to start questioning if this is something that is because of the data that you downloaded, or maybe there's a I don't know, pumping station that now is releasing the flows very late after the storm event. Start questioning yourself why it happens that. Volumetric runoff coefficient. So you have to make sure that the volumetric runoff coefficient is less than 1, meaning that there's no more volume than the volume that it rained. Okay, something that you have to check as well for that. Then I will show you some examples of the wet weather flow time series. So this is a perfect time series that you want to have if you want to model a hydraulic model, right? You have your rain, multiple rain events to choose from, and you have your flow, very consistent, and you see the response every time that it rains, right? Like I said before, you want to have at least 4 or 5 events greater than 15 millimeters to calibrate for the wet weather flow. So this is like the perfect scenario. You have many rain events, many intensities, different volumes. The data looks very consistent, so we can start calibrating the model if you have anything like this. But now let's talk about some challenges. So let's say you receive a data set, you have your flow data, and then you have more than one rain gauge. However, one of those rain gauges is showing you data that is not consistent with the other rain gauges or with the other 2 rain gauges. Like, what do you do? And here's a perfect example. So the 3 bars at the top, that's the rainfall data from a rain gauge. So the first one, you see you have a volume of 7.8 millimeters, and the other 2 are very consistent. One is showing like close to 40, and the other one is showing 25 millimeters. So the first thing that you have to do is compare other rain events. Is that something that you see throughout the monitoring period? Is always inconsistent, that rain event, or sorry, that rain gauge? It's always is consistent. It's always showing you less volume. If that's the case, maybe there is an issue with the rain gauge, so we can scrap it and use the other rain data. Or it could happen that the rain happened in a very localized point, which happens a lot. And if that's the case, then you can use your interpolation method. You can use IDW, you can use Thyssen polygons to extrapolate or interpolate the rain data, and then you can use that for the modeling, right? But again, start questioning yourself, why do we have that discrepancy between rain events? And the other thing that I was talking to you about is time to peak. You have a rain event, and then you see the response very late during the day. Like the first scenario, you see a rain that happens, can't see, but it's almost like a day after. The INI happens like a day after the rain event. So there might be some issues when the data was downloaded. Maybe the dates were shifted. So again, try to ask for the raw data so you can do the analysis based on the raw data. Or a lot of the time what happens is if you only have 1 hour discrepancy, sometimes because of the daylight saving time. So either the rain gauge or the flow meter doesn't change the time when the other equipment changed the time. So you will see it because that will be consistent during during the summer or during the winter, right? That will be that 1 hour of change consistently. However, and I think that's the example that we have below, in the chart below. So we have the peak intensity before the rain event, and I think that's 1 hour exactly between the peak and the rain. So that's the DST, the daylight saving time, that needs to be adjusted. Okay, so that's an easy fix. You just shift the rainfall event or the flow event to match with the rain. Okay? So that's an easy fix. But you have to confirm that with whoever is giving you the data, whoever is doing the flow monitoring. You have to confirm if it accounts for the daylight saving time. Okay, just a quick check. Just make sure that the peaks between rain and INI is half an hour. It's usually half an hour, and we'll see some of the criteria. So some of the criteria that a lot of the municipalities have adopted in Southern Ontario is the CWEM or ex-WAPO criteria. If you have heard about the WAPO criteria or CWEM, so this is the criteria that you have to follow. And basically what it's telling you is the shape of the hydrograph has to resemble the observed hydrograph. The difference between peaks and troughs has to be half an hour. It might change. The peak depth for surcharge condition has to be plus minus 0.1 to or 10%, whichever is greater. And I think the most important ones are really the peak flow and flow volume criteria, which is showing you here. You can find this table in the website, the CWEM website, which is, and there's a document called Code of Hydraulic Modeling Practice. You can download it and it will show you the table and the criteria.
Awesome. So we have I think 2 more trivia questions. So number 6, what is the largest lake entirely inside of Canada? A few more seconds. And that's it. Okay, back to you, Alan.
Thanks. So I'm just going to show you a quick sample of a project that we did in Toronto, where we have flow monitoring data. We review the flow monitoring data, we calibrate the model, and then we'll show you some examples of what a calibrated model can do if you run the different scenarios. So the first slide here, we show the location of the flow meters in red, and then we calibrated the model using that flow data, using the RTK, I guess, approach, and then you have the RTK values shown in the callouts. I don't have to go over the details for the RTK. That might be for a different presentation, but This is what we use. We also have some rain gauges and rainfall data that we use for the calibration. And the rain gauges are the blue icons on the east of the study area. Okay, so we calibrate these flow meters, and once the model was calibrated, then we can run different historical events. And because we have different historical events and the rainfall intensities are different, then the model will predict different results. The purpose for this analysis was to understand if depending on the rain event, the system was backing up to the basement and causing basement flooding. So we have the historical storm for August 19, 2005. So we run the calibrated model, and then we show the results here. Red means that the pipe is a bottleneck. Yellow pipes mean is backflowing. The green nodes, if you can see the green nodes, it means that there's no risk of basement flooding. If you see a yellow node or a yellow manhole, that means that there is a risk of basement flooding. And then if you see red manholes or red nodes, that means that the water level is actually at the surface. So this is the August 19, 2005 event. Then we run also the July 31st, 2012 event. And you can see the system is performing very well. That means that the intensity of this particular storm in this particular area is not as intense as the previous one, as the previous storm, the August 19. And then we run a different scenario, the May 28, 2013. And again, very similar results to the August 19, but not as problematic as I would say than the August 19. Also, something that the City of Toronto asked us to do is to do a ramp-up analysis. So basically, the ramp-up analysis is just to run the model, the calibrated model during different design storms. And then once you have the different design storms, you identify the events, meaning the design storm, for which each pipe segment exceeds its capacity or is acting as a bottleneck. And then we classify this and we color code the maps. So if you see a pipe in red, it means that it has capacity for less than 2 years, meaning that starting the 2-year event, start acting as a bottleneck. Yellow pipe, meaning that starting the 5-year event, start acting as a bottleneck. So it has capacity up to the 2-year event, and so on. So you have the legend there at the bottom. So you see the pipe capacity. So in summary, why do we use flow monitoring data, and why do we calibrate models, and why do we use these models to perform the analysis? So we need to know existing capacity constraints so we can solve any issues, existing issues or future condition issues. We need to develop solutions, and the developing of the solution has to be, it's better if you have the flow monitoring data to develop those solutions. Understand the cost associated with growth to accommodate the future growth. We use these models for EA or master plan planning studies. Again, different facing scenarios. Development charge, the DCs is very important to come up with the DCs studies. Yes, and then you evaluate and provide solutions for new pipes, pumping station, treatment plants, storage facilities, overflows, many other things that we can do with the models. I think it's back to you, Matt.
Awesome, thanks, Alan. And yeah, to Alan's point, I mean, the example from Toronto was more of a ramped analysis for different storm events. I mean, the focus for that program that Toronto has is basement flooding program. So really the idea was to assess the existing system, but we could layer in more data on top of that, even Alan, right, with if we had an understanding of growth, if that area was growing, if there was, you know, more population going to be added to that area, we could layer that in as well to understand both from a growth and a design storm perspective, where those bottlenecks would be. So that's that's more, I guess, into the master planning EA type of project that we would do, but just to add on to that great example there. So thank you. I think we have our last trivia question, and this one will be a little bit trickier. So if you were, let me get this. If you were a French Canadian voyager praying for furs, you would take your canoes up the Ottawa River and then portage across the land to Lake Nipissing. Which river would you then take west from Lake Nipissing to Lake Huron? I'll give a few more seconds for people on this one because it's a bit of a mouthful and a bit of a read. So we'll give you know, an extra 10-15 seconds on this. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. So we do have a typical question. We've been, it's been awesome to connect with some people following the webinar. So we do like to provide the opportunity. If you do want to connect with us one-on-one after this or do a pilot, feel free to reach out to us again outside of this. You know, we've had, again, some great discussions following these webinars, so always happy to join and see if there's, you know, potential opportunity to work together, work on projects, or just even answer some questions or talk more about the solutions or the various topics that we've covered. Again, in 45 minutes to 55 minutes, it's hard to get into all the details and the nitty gritty. So again, if you are interested in connecting, yeah, feel free to answer yes or maybe, and we can reach out after. And again, we're always open if you want to email myself or Alan or info@civi.ca email account, feel free to do so. Awesome. So as I mentioned, all of the videos that we have, this flow monitoring series was a 5-part series. But we've done, I think this is our 11th or 12th maybe webinar. So all of that's on YouTube. Go to our website if you want to check out all the videos are on there and link you to our YouTube account. So this one, again, was more focused on flow monitoring. We're going to continue to do these into the future. So keep an eye out for future LinkedIn, Hubs, email, newsletter type invites, and yeah, we're looking forward to connecting again with everybody in the future. With that, I'll say thank you. Thanks everybody for coming out.